Yep.
Okay.
Oh,
Hello.
there's Emily.
Oh, okay. She's got it.
Hey, sorry about that. Just ran upstairs from the public hearings, but I'm here now. So hi, welcome.
Good.
And I heard that we're recording the meeting, so we've gotten started.
Yep.
So sorry guys, I'm just gonna pull things up. My computer is still plugging in and getting going. So give me about 30 seconds.
I didn't think there was any way you were going to make it here on time, Emily.
I know, I saw you in the room and I had a feeling that's what you were thinking as you were on your way out. And yeah, that public hearing has a lot more comments than I anticipated. So I was sorry to have to leave, but that's okay. So I've got the agenda up so we can go ahead and get started. Thanks for your patience, everyone. So we are calling this Regional Housing Council meeting to order. It is Wednesday, November 12th, and we'll start with some introductions. I'm Emily Klaus, Thurston County Commissioner and Chair of this council, and I'll pass it over to Tumwater.
Joan Cassie, Tumwater, and I'm here tonight with our planning director and community director, Brad Medbrud, and I don't see, is Diane here, our deputy director? I don't see her.
I don't see Sharon yet, but our deputy should also be.
Perfect. Thanks, Joan. And thanks, Brad. I will really quickly introduce, I forgot to introduce the staff that were here for the county. We have Leah Tangeman, Tom Webster, Caven Hill, let's see, Jackie Velasco, and Elisa Sparkman. Did I miss any county staff? All right, and I know our Assistant County Manager, Josh Cummings, will be joining us shortly. He's also caught up in the public hearing, but we'll see him pretty soon. And I will go ahead and pass it over to Lacey. We have Carolyn. Oh, there you are.
Hi. Carolyn Cox representing Lacey, and I'm joined by our planning manager, Ryan Andrews, and our housing coordinator, Jennifer Adams. And can I send it over to Olympia now?
All right. I am Robert Vanderpool, representing Olympia for today. And I believe I have Jacinda, Kim, and Krista. And I'm probably missing someone else. No, we do not have our director right now. So that's cool. So we got 3 of us. Yeah. Who else is up?
Yelm.
Yelm.
Last but not least, as always, Gary Cooper, Planning and Building Manager for the City of Yelm. I do not know if our Councilman Johnstone will be here or not, but I will be here listening.
Thanks, Gary, for being here. And I will try not to call on you for a vote this time.
I'd love to vote if you want me to, but yeah, I understand.
All right, so next on our agenda is to approve the agenda and the minutes. So hopefully folks had a chance to review the minutes from our October 22nd meeting. And we can go ahead and do these both as one motion. Do I have a motion for the minutes and for today's agenda?
So
move.
Okay, Robert got it.
Okay.
All right, we got Robert with the motion and a second from Carolyn.
Second.
All right, and all in favor, oh wait, is there any discussion on the minutes or today's agenda? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All right, then that passes. Thanks, everyone. And that brings us to our third item on the agenda, public comment.
We do not have anyone sign up for public comment, but if any of the participant attendees would like to make public comment, if you can use the raise hand function, we can promote you to panelists so you can make public comments. So we'll just give it a second. See if there's any public comments. All right, I'm not seeing any raised hands. It does not appear we have any public comments this evening.
All right, thanks, Tom. And did we get any written comment for any items today?
No, we did not.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. So then we'll move on to our next item, which is the final review of the Thurston Homeless Housing Plan for 2025 to 2030. And this one I will turn over to Jackie.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you are not sick of hearing me talk about this. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. But this is exciting news. This is sort of the closing chapter of the final draft of our 2025 to 2030 homeless housing plan. If you've been along the ride, you'll know that we've been kind of working with a ton of core stakeholders, which includes folks with lived experience, service providers in the homeless response system, our local and municipal elected officials, the community at large, to try and compile what we think is a pretty good draft and a pretty decent plan. The most exciting stuff that's been happening with that recently is we did post the plan for 30 days for public comment. We got 8 written responses in for public comment on that plan. And then we held a public hearing with the Board of County Commissioners on October 21st. And we had 5 respondents and only 1 overlap. So one person who submitted written comment was also a respondent at the public hearing, which we felt was pretty decent feedback, all things considered. Something that was really encouraging that came out of, at least from my opinion, out of the public comment was that there was nothing super divisive that we were hearing back from folks about the priorities in the plan. A lot of the feedback had to do with some of the strategies and tasks and nuances there, but we weren't hearing any widespread community unrest or challenges to sort of what we had outlined as our overarching priorities. So that felt really good. We did sort of, if I were to summarize the responses back, I think we got the most feedback about the fact that the plan focused a lot on funding services in the homeless response system. So some respondents felt that there should be a larger focus on building affordable housing, which is absolutely a need. We totally agree that housing stock is a big piece of the puzzle, and it also isn't necessarily the purpose of this specific plan, which is to operate the homeless response system and services. And so we sort of addressed that a little bit in an appendix in the plan that if you're feeling real motivated, you can dig into and read. We also heard from folks that they would have liked to see a few additional tasks and strategies added around year-round outreach, not outreach to folks who are unsheltered only during inclement or hazardous weather events. So finding a way to sort of incorporate that, maybe calling out more specifically some issues around medical respite and some other specific objectives there. Some folks had some feedback about accountability, transparency, and equity in the system. Transparency and equity, which was exciting because that's actually a big focus of the plan. And so that gave us some feedback around maybe how that has or hasn't been clear in our communication of the tasks and strategies. And then some folks had wanted just a little more attention in general to encampment response. So that's sort of where we landed. Like I mentioned, all of that feedback came from written comment or folks at the public hearing. And Tom and I sort of went on a mini tour during the public engagement period where we were sharing with different groups about the plan. And so we kind of took any verbal feedback we got in those sittings as well and incorporated it into what we perceived as feedback as well. Tom, does that kind of cover what you were hoping for as an update on that?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jackie. I would add that for most of those, we did make adjustments to the plan. So especially around the outreach and some of the shelters and encampments, we did make, we added 1 or 2 tasks and we added some language, some other additional tasks. So all the public comments and a summary are included in the plan in an appendix. And there were, I just want to kind of ensure folks, we not only just listened to the public feedback, we actually did make some changes to the plan to address that feedback.
And now we have a final draft. If you look in our filing system, it's probably saved as like plan, final all caps, final all caps, final all caps, JV edits, or something like that. But it's official, it's saved. I think we've got a good one, everybody.
So I think at this point, we're happy to take questions that folks have. So next steps is we are looking for a recommendation from this body to take to the Board of County Commissioners for final approval of the plan before it's submitted to the Department of Commerce before the end of the year. So happy to answer any questions, have any discussion, but we are looking for a motion from this body to recommend moving forward with the plan as drafted.
Chair,
Yes, I see.
could I,
And
could I, could I offer a motion now?
let's see if there are any questions for staff really quick, if that's okay.
All right.
Do you have any questions for staff, Carolyn, or are you just eager for a motion?
No, I'm just eager for a motion.
Okay, let me get Robert's question really quick and see if that sparks any discussion, and then we can get to the motion.
It's not really a question. It's more like I read the comments, the public comments, and I like to see, I like where this is going because it's a lot of what I'm reading into is yes, we love this and we would like to do more, right? Which is, I think, a good place to be. That's all I want to mention is that yes, yeah, affordable housing, we should be building that, right? We should be considering that as a priority, but that's also something that we would need to advocate for to do. So I think that I think this is a wonderful plan. I like where it's going. It's good to see that the comments are like, yeah, we love this and let's do more. So I'm ready to second when Carolyn's ready to motion.
All right, thank you both for your enthusiasm. Carolyn, you can go ahead and make the motion if you'd like, and then there will be another chance for comments after the second.
Okay. So I move that we recommend that the 5-year homeless response plan move forward as presented.
Second.
All right, motion and a second on the floor. Do we have any further discussion?
Should we add complete with all caps and exclamation points?
I don't know, Robert, are you okay with that friendly amendment?
Yeah, that's fine. As long as
I'm
yeah, go ahead.
kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, we're kidding, but
Huh?
I do want to ask, I see some of our advisory board members here, and I wanted to specifically ask, not to put you on the spot, but if you have any feedback, I'd really love to hear it. But now, before this goes to the Board of County Commissioners, in my discussions with community members over the last couple of weeks, I've found that a lot of community members who are service providers or who have been service providers or who have had lived experience in the homeless response system, a lot of folks have come forward to me and asked me questions and kind of helped highlight some of the nuance included in the plan. And I've really appreciated that feedback. And I know staff also have really appreciated that as well. I will say some of the concerns that have been raised as far as like the nuances in the plan, I was able to ask staff about some of those and the things that haven't been addressed in the plan that were brought to us through public comment. And the response from staff, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong or add anything if you'd like, but the feedback was essentially that this is a living document. So even if it's passed this year by the Board of County Commissioners, that doesn't mean it's set in stone for the whole 5 years. If there are process improvements or new resources that come forward or new concerns that are raised pertaining to this plan or its implementation, then we as the Regional Housing Council can revisit that at any time. So with that, I'm more comfortable moving it forward than I would have been if I thought we had to address all of the components right now. But with that all being said, I just want to open the floor to anybody, but particularly I'm interested in hearing from our advisory board members if you have any feedback. All right. I'm not hearing any comments. So I will go ahead and call for the vote. All in favor of passing this draft as presented today, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed or any abstentions? All right. And my vote is aye as well. So that passes unanimously. Thanks, everyone. And thank you so much to staff who have worked so hard on this. I know if I'm fielding a number of inquiries, you're probably fielding quite a bit more than I am since you're the subject matter experts. So thank you for all the work that you've put into this. And good job getting it passed.
Yeah.
We'd rather folks ask. If they're asking, it means they want to know and they're engaging. That's a great place to be.
Exactly. Yeah, and I've been really impressed with the public's engagement on this topic too. I've had a lot of people reach out to me, and I agree with you, Jackie, 100%. If people are reaching out with questions or concerns, it means they're paying attention, which is good. That means the outreach is working. So that's really good to hear. So with that being passed, we can go ahead and move forward to our next item, which is the Regional Housing Council 2026 legislative priorities. And I will hand this one to you, Tom.
Great, thank you. I did see Carolyn put your hand up. Carolyn, did you have a?
Yeah, just a quick, I just wanted to acknowledge that Vanessa Dolby, Lacey's Director of Community and Economic Development, has joined the proceedings. So welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you.
All right. All right, we continue our discussions on legislative priorities for the 2026 legislative session. So in your packet, we have fleshed out 3 of the items that we've been talking about over the last several months. So again, we're not looking for a vote yet. Our next steps is wanted to share where we're at. We are hoping to take these to the advisory boards. We have not had an opportunity to engage with the advisory boards yet on these. So did want to, our intention is after this meeting to take them to the November meetings for the Homeless Services and Affordable Housing Advisory Board to share these with them just to get their final input. It would have been nice. We should have done that sooner. Our fault for not doing that sooner, but we did want to make sure that they at least had a chance to see these and weigh in with any concerns. So the first one is, again, around maintaining funding for various projects, including the Encampment Resolution Program, the Maple Court Permanent Supportive Housing Conversion, and the Boulevard Habitat for Humanity Boulevard Road Project. So maintaining funding, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the ERP funding here in just a second. The next priority was around supporting an amendment to clarify the Residential Landlord Tenant Act. We have been looking, and at this point, it is unclear whether there is going to be legislation proposed this session concerning the RLTA. So if there's not any specific legislation is being proposed, it may be something that the Regional Housing Council will want to consider whether it's part of a legislative priority if there's not something specific to recommend. We'd heard that the Department of Commerce was going to recommend some language. We've since learned that Commerce is not going to be moving that language forward. We've also heard that Catholic Community Services may be proposing some language around the RLTA. I've reached out to Gabe Ash at CCS, who says they are engaged on it, but he wasn't sure whether there was a specific legislative proposal. So he is helping me connect with the right people. So we continue to research whether there is language on this one. This is also one I know there's some different perspectives on how the RLTA should address and clarify whether those in enhanced shelters or tiny home villages are subject to this act. So I know this one also has some different perspectives on that. So right now we are continuing to clarify whether there actually is a legislative ask that's going to be proposed for this session for that item. And then the third is supporting the Connecting Housing to Infrastructure Program, or CHIP. This is an important grant program that is really beneficial to jurisdictions to provide infrastructure next to new affordable housing developments. We've also added the area of interest that was in last year's RHC legislative priorities around mold and moisture. Thank you, Elisa, for sharing your screen. This was, again, because there wasn't specific legislation to recommend or to support or oppose. It was wanting to maintain the interest and encouraging the legislation to look at increasing protections for households impacted by conditions of mold and moisture in housing. So that is where we currently are. So again, our intent is to take these to the advisory boards. We will hopefully get a final answer on the RLTA question of whether there is going to be some proposed language to that amendment, and then bring that back to you in December. So happy to have any questions or engage in discussion around any of these. but wanted to provide that update of where we were at.
Thanks, Tom. I see Carolyn's hand.
Okay. I might have misunderstood, Tom, but I thought you said you had a funding update as well.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Okay.
So the second piece of this is the King County Regional Homelessness Authority on behalf is working to coordinate with all of the 5 counties who have funding under the Encampment Resolution Program to submit a letter to Governor Inslee requesting additional funding for the ERP program. So an increase over the baseline of the funding that was provided for this current fiscal year. So there's a letter that's included in your packet. They've asked us for kind of information on local accomplishments since the beginning of the program, and they've asked for our funding request. We have put in, our current funding is around 5.5 million. We're actually, through this letter, making a request for 6.6 million. That allows for full funding for all the projects and continued funding for Quinn Street and Unity Commons. So there's a ask to also, for the Regional Housing Council to sign on to this draft letter that King County is putting together to advocate for additional ERP funding. So kind of a parallel process with the legislative priorities, but that is a letter going directly to the governor's office that is being worked on. So in your packet is the draft. We don't have the final version yet for your review, but looking for your direction to give authority to Emily to sign that letter once it is finalized.
A quick question. Would the additional funding be 1.1 for a total of 6.6 million, or are we asking for 6.6 million more?
No, it's a 1.1 additional for a total of 6.6.
Okay.
3 million.
Thank you.
Yep. That would provide for inflationary funding increases for many of the projects, a bigger bump for Maple Court, and then a bigger bump for continuing for Quinn Street and Unity Commons.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions about the letter? Hopefully folks had a chance to review that in the packet. And as Tom stated, it's not a final copy, but I was hoping just to kind of, procedurally do things above board. I was hoping to do a motion for this so that the council could authorize me to sign the letter when it's finalized, which would prevent staff from having to come back to the council with the final copy for a motion, and we could get it done. We could streamline it and get it done a little quicker. So if there are any questions or comments, the floor is open. And if there is a motion to go ahead and authorize me to sign the letter on behalf of the council, working with staff, that would also be appreciated.
Well, I would move
All right.
that we authorize.
Oh, thank you. I didn't see the hand. Sorry about that.
That's
Go ahead,
okay.
Carolyn.
It's a little hard with the screen on. I would move that we authorize Emily to go ahead and sign this letter.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on this item?
Is just email us the final copy when they're done finalizing it, just for record keeping. That's all.
Perfect. I
Thank you.
believe that's the plan, right, Tom?
Yep, certainly will.
Cool.
Wonderful. Thanks, Robert. All right, so with that being said, any final questions or comments on this item? Okay, I'll go ahead and call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
All right. Any opposed or abstentions? All right, then that motion passes. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Tom, for putting that together for us. All right, so we can move right along. So legislative priorities, I guess coming back to the broader discussion. Does anyone have, actually, Tom, did you get through all of them?
Yes, we did.
Okay, perfect. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share or any comments on the priorities? I'm also interested in knowing if folks are have other topics they would like us to consider for the legislative priorities. And we still have one more meeting to come back before we finalize them. Is that right, Tom? Next month?
That's
Perfect.
correct.
So I was hoping that between October and this meeting, council members could take time to review the priorities and think about them and talk with the community and see what the community thinks. And so if there are comments on any of these priorities or additional items that you would like us to consider, please go ahead and share. And advisory board members, you're also welcome to share as well. And staff too. I see some staff on here that talked about this last time. So anyone's welcome to chime in. All right, well, I'll chime in because I did have some thoughts about the RLTA item. And I have quite a few thoughts, but I'll try to keep them concise. I think that for me, I would like to remove that item from the legislative priorities, especially from being one of our top 3. Considering the fact that we aren't sure if legislation will even come forward next year. It's a short session, so if we're unclear on the process that's taking place with that one, I think that it might not be very effective as one of our top 3 priorities. But outside of that, after reviewing this further and talking with community members, I do have some concern about the suggested clarification to the RLTA protections, just in general. And since there's nothing in the works that we can identify as far as legislators bringing this forward next year, there wasn't really anyone at the state level that I could talk to get some of my questions answered. But I'm primarily concerned with the risk that it poses to individuals living in shelters and transitional housing facilities. I'm concerned that clarifying this to remove protections for those individuals could create a lot of harm and would cause a lot of harm. So I do have some concerns relating to that, but I'll stop there because I see Kim's hand and I know you shared last time, so maybe you have some input.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing it up, because I think the reason why we decided to put it on there, because it is having an impact on our unhoused population, but not necessarily in the way I think that it was generally intended. It was supposed to be protecting residents, but what we have seen in our community is that that we are putting evictions that, will probably get approved. We're putting evictions on people in order to exit them. And that's one thing that we don't want to put on our unhoused population, especially while they're in a time of, there's no stability for them, right? And then we know that once an eviction gets onto their record, it just really limits them, I think, for their entire future, even if they're able to get out of homelessness in the future. And I don't think that people or whoever's making the law realize the impact it was. We had the closure of a tiny home village because that was faith-based, because they were told that they couldn't exit anyone without eviction. And so they're just doing it as volunteers and using their own money, and they were not prepared. They're not landlords in that sense. And so we just, and that is the effect that's happening. That's how it's hurting our residents, is that we have less homes, because if it's people who are just trying to have tiny home village, like it's not the same as like someone who has a lease in an apartment and expecting payment. And you know, we're working with folks who are, you know, struggling to get stable. So that's why I think it was brought up, and I don't think that that's getting to whoever's making the law, and that's why I think we were trying to push it. So because I feel like we have so few providers in our community right now who actually are even willing to do shelter work, or you know, that it would become harder, and this has already become harder for our current providers. So, and I don't know if, you know, any other providers, I know Meg's on, but I'm not sure if it's been affected for their particular shelter. But theirs is a little different because theirs is a congregate shelter, and that doesn't, so it's anything with a lockable door. So that's why, like Maple Court with the hotel or a tiny home, that's what makes the clarification there for them, why it's then treated as an eviction versus an exit that can be enforced. So
Thank you, Kim. Meg, I see your hand.
Yeah, I think all that I would just add to the discussion is that I think the intention behind the effort is really important, and one for us to hold as a community, and where that falls in terms of uplifting it as a legislative priority or not, I think that that's still, you know, could be up for discussion. But I think the intention behind it is that for emergency housing providers, how do we ensure that those emergency housing providers, without a formal lease for people, are not just kicking people out when they want to? And I think that that is a very fundamental and important question for us to ask ourselves as a community. And I think for us, you know, as Kim said, this doesn't really impact our shelter operations directly because of the congregate setting, but we take all of our termination of services like extremely seriously whenever we have to ask somebody to leave. We review that policy regularly. I just literally came from a meeting where we were reviewing that policy as a team. And so I think that, you know, the intention is really important, and how do we not pass policy that has unintended consequences, like putting people at higher risk for having evictions on their records, which makes it nearly impossible for them to ever get housed, particularly in any kind of subsidized unit in the future. And that is it's like a death sentence for people. And so I think what Kim is saying is really, really important as well. And we have to figure out a way to have a nuanced conversation about it.
Thank you so much, Meg, for that insight. And thank you, Kim, for the additional information as well. I definitely appreciate the conversation, and I think it does demand a nuanced conversation, which is part of why my initial suggestion was, well, let's just maybe not have it on there because we don't even know if this is coming forward next year. So how much time do we want to allocate as the Regional Housing Council to have that nuanced conversation if we aren't sure if it's even coming forward next year? But I do appreciate, Meg, what you stated about the intention behind uplifting this. And I think that really kind of hits on where my thought process is, because I don't want the Regional Housing Council to support a legislative priority that causes harm to anyone in the community, but who I'm particularly concerned about is the residents in these shelters and tiny home villages and other transitional housing units. And I think that there are potentially other ways that we could go about hitting on what the intention is if we knew a little bit more about what that intention was. If it's just about not having evictions on people's records, I think that is a really honorable intention. But would we be suggesting a clarification to the law that actually causes more harm because now people are getting kicked out more frequently? And hey, at least they don't have an eviction on their record, but they're still becoming maybe unhoused at higher rates if the clarification language was in there that kind of got rid of some of these protections. So I have concerns about that. And I think if we do want to leave this item on our legislative priorities, I'd be okay with that if we kind of talk through a little bit of those nuances, such as maybe recommending that, you know, maybe this issue could be corrected through training and guidance or additional resources to our providers to allow them to have capacity to do, if they're going to do exits, to go through the process that is required by law, rather than just removing that process if something were to get changed. I hope that makes sense. But I guess what I'm saying is I would rather strengthen protections for people to not be exited from programs, but I would also want to make sure the other end of that is providers have the support they need to be able to follow those processes that are in place. So that's kind of where I'm at with this item. And I don't know if folks have any thoughts on whether or not, like, which direction they would want to go with this one. And Robert, I see your hand.
It kind of feels like the need to have a conversation with a member of the legislature about specific language to be written into a bill. I'm hearing that, you know, we want to make sure that it gets at this specific point and doesn't go the other direction on a policy. Because that has happened before, where there is a reactionary policy that ends up going the opposite direction and creating a loophole in the law. And so, I don't know who we would talk to about this. Do we want to, Chair, do you want to consider like maybe having like trying to schedule a time to meet with a member of the legislature who deals with housing to have this conversation and kind of bring it to their attention? Or do you want to remove it from this but then put this on our work plan to have that conversation?
Are you asking if I'd be open to having someone come to an RHC meeting, someone from the legislature, or are you saying have those conversations to gather more information and then come back to it as the council?
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to go about it. We can draft something that's specific, right? That and then meet with a member of the legislature here in LD 22, right? Meet with one of our members and be like, here's the specific change that we're asking about. I think if we had the specific language change in there, then it would be, I would feel much more safer about this.
Yeah, I like that idea.
I'm not sure where we go procedurally about that, though.
Right, that's what I'm trying to think through as well, because I think so. What I've heard a lot from Kim and that in City of Olympia, which is a great perspective because a lot of these programs are in the City of Olympia. So I really appreciate that perspective. I'd also be interested in hearing how this impacts maybe other jurisdictions as well, and who's really got a stake in this so that I can fully understand that intention piece behind it, because that would help in those conversations with legislators about the specific language. So that's kind of what I think. And I see Ryan's hand.
Yeah, I'll just support what Kim said from a Lacey perspective. With Maple Court, we've talked to the providers out of Maple Court, and they have same concerns as what was articulated by Kim as far as being able to exit people. What precipitated this was a lawsuit, and essentially froze any exits from places even after code of conduct violations, which have caused security issues, safety issues, those kinds of things. And so it's potentially not for the best of the residents, including the people that are around the occupants. So we'd support, fully what Kim's put forward too. And I believe this is on the City of Lacey's legislative agenda as well. Carolyn, I don't know, Councilmember Cox, if you remember that or not.
I believe you're right.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks, Ryan, for chiming in. And definitely Maple Court is one of the big projects that we're hearing a lot about. So that's good to know kind of where this precipitated from, because I was actually curious. And I think I may have asked Tom that in the executive meeting last week. So sorry, Tom, I think I forgot what the answer was if I asked that, but I was kind of wondering like, where is this stemming from? But I see your hand, Meg.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I'm just curious if there, or again, just to kind of highlight the other side of that coin of how providers are, what standards are providers being held to when exiting people as well. And so I think that that's where it stems from my understanding, was exits that were, that have been happening in the community in various programs that were being challenged by the people who were exited from those programs. And then wondering what it looks like for protections for those individuals, and how to strike that balance between protection for those individuals and the ability for providers to keep their operations safe without having to go through this formal process that can be very damaging to people long term with an eviction on their record.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Meg. I definitely agree with that, and I'm curious, and maybe this isn't the best place to have the full conversation because we just don't have a ton of time. We're actually past time for this item, so I do want to kind of try to wrap it up so we can get to the governance conversation. But I'm curious to know a little bit more about the lawsuit that precipitated this. Just like those details, I think would help me kind of understand where we're going with it. I don't disagree with a lot of what I'm hearing, but where my concerns lie are particularly in like the mission and the vision that the RHC has. We've spent quite a bit of time this year talking about that. And a lot of what we talk about in our mission and vision and the homeless housing plan that we've just moved forward to the BOCC, we talk a lot about equity, accountability, and transparency. So I think that those same values should be embedded within our legislative priority list. And so without knowing like what angle we're trying to take, I fear that a vague legislative priority about clarification without identifying exactly what that clarification should include could potentially go against everything that we've just spent so long working on as a council, which is to protect people who are experiencing housing insecurity and homelessness. So, but you know, we're talking about, you know, two sides of the coin. So there are a lot of nuances that go into this. But I do want to try to wrap up the legislative priorities conversation. So what do folks think about, Robert, maybe you're anticipating what my question is going to be. You can go ahead.
I hope I'm anticipating and I'm not throwing it in a loop. I'm wondering if we move forward with this, right? And this is going to come back next month, I believe, yeah. And I think moving forward with this, but when the sheet goes to the members of the legislature that it goes to, I believe LD 22 probably, a couple of us find time to go and explain specifics, and try to find time to meet with them about this, because then in person we can specify a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. So since this one has some clarification needed around the intention, why don't we have the RLTA conversation next month and see where we're landing at that time? Are there other legislative priorities that anyone has thoughts on? And I'll just kind of go through real quick. And if you have any thoughts or you want this to be brought back up next month, let me know. So we have the top one, which is the maintain funding of Thurston County projects allocated. So basically the ERP, maintaining funding for ERP. Does anyone have concerns about leaving that as our #1 priority? Or does anyone want us to chime in? Okay. So we'll keep that as a #1 tentatively. This is all final next month, so not yet, but we'll keep that one there. #2 for RLTA, we'll revisit that next month to try to iron out some of the details around intent. And then we have the CHIP program, supporting the Connecting Housing to Infrastructure program. Any concerns about leaving that one on the top 3?
No.
Okay. And then below that, which I won't go through all of these, but we do have the larger list of the, complete legislative priorities. Is there anything anyone wants to raise just to bring back next month? Not asking if you've got concerns, just if you want some more time to flesh out any of these. We have ERP, Maple Court Boulevard project with Habitat for Humanity, and then we have RLTA and CHIP. Are there any of those aside from the RLTA that we want to bring up next month for further conversation?
No.
All right, thank you. All right, so then next month, let's just touch on RLTA. You're all welcome to bring forward any additional considerations that you might think of between now and then, but just for staff's awareness, why don't we have another conversation about RLTA next month? And then we can kind of wrap up the legislative priorities piece. Does that sound good to everyone? All right, perfect. Thank you so much. So we can move right along then. I know we're behind time, so sorry, Amy, but I'm going to go ahead and bring Amy up into the discussion to lead us through our conversation about Regional Housing Council governance. And looks like we've got a Mentimeter again, so that's great. Thanks, Amy.
Great, thank you so much. It's great to see all of you again. If you would take a minute, I know you're all pros. We did this last time we were together. If you want to use your phone, you can do a quick scan of the QR code. You can just open up another window if you prefer to go to menti.com. So let's take about 15 seconds and see if that gives you a chance to get logged in. And while you're doing that, a refresher of our time this evening is that we have together, you have done the hard work. You now have a vision and you have a mission and you have values. So you have a foundation, a really clear foundation that you didn't have just a few months ago. Now that we've got that foundation, this evening, we can spend our time looking at governance, looking at some of the issues that you've already raised about how this group can work together even more effectively. Before we dive in, I would just love to hear how you're doing. So let's start here. Would you go ahead and type in one word? How's your day been so far? I'm guessing for some of you, this is probably your 25th Zoom meeting of the day. I've already gotten to be on one Zoom meeting with Robert, so I know you've had lots of meetings. Let's see. So we've got some folks who said it's been productive. Some say long, frazzled, cold. Yeah, I don't think I've been warm since the summer. Some folks are feeling balanced, exhilarating. Someone's had an anxious day. Thank you for sharing that. Busy, slow. Okay. So that was to warm up your chat fingers and to get us into the right frame of mind. As I mentioned, tonight we're going to really quickly go over your vision, mission, and values. You've got them. They're exciting. We're going to celebrate them. And then we want to spend the bulk of our time on governance. This is my last scheduled session with you. I miss you already. So what that means is I'm going to be guiding you. It might feel a little forceful at times because I really want to make sure we get through these governance conversations that you have said are so important to you. And then we'll end with hearing from Tom and also from the chair about next steps. What can you expect as we head out of here today? So we now have a vision. Here it is. You've seen it many times. And I really do. I know I keep talking about celebrating it, but I really hope that you do. It's a big deal that you've done this much work in this short amount of time. You've also agreed on your mission. So you'll remember when we first started working together, there was a lot of confusion around what RHC was, what it wasn't, why you did things, why you didn't. And now you've got this mission that you can come back to. When we were together last time, you finalized your values. And you'll remember that your values are how you're going to work together. And you want to step further. Last time we were together, you talked about what these words mean, what those words actually mean in the context of the RHC. And so you've got that now too. Tom, do you want to give a quick update? Is there a time at some point where members might expect to see this on the website, or maybe there's a different plan for maintaining those? What's your thought, Tom?
Oh, that's a good question. We can talk to Elisa and we can get these up on our website, I think, pretty quickly.
Excellent. Great. And from last time we were together, you've got a statement for each one of these. And that is not a place that all organizations get to. Not all commissions and councils get to where you did. So please know that what you've done is really great. And now when you're working together, when you're figuring out how are we going to do this, you've got these 5 guiding principles that can help you. When it comes to governance this evening, I've got 3 buckets. There are 3 buckets of questions and concerns that I've heard that I want to facilitate through for you. The first one is I'm going to ask you to confirm your agreements. You'll remember through this journey together, you've been writing team agreements. How is it you're going to operate together? Secondly, we're going to dive into strategies. There are some suggested strategies and there are some questions for all of you regarding those. And then finally, we're going to dive down a little bit deeper into operations and really make sure that we've got those operations questions answered. So can you give me a thumbs up? Are you on board so far? Is this making sense? Yes, Meg is here. Carolyn, yes. All right, here we go. When it comes to your meeting agreements, you have refined these since the summer. You may remember it was way back at the fairgrounds in the late summer when you first came up with the first draft of how you wanted to work together. And you did it through the context of these 3 different categories. What are you committing to do? What are you committing to not do? And what are you going to do when things don't go the way you wanted? Since that time in the summer, we've been together 3 other occasions, and these team agreements have been modified just slightly based on your input and your feedback. So what I'm going to ask from you is, do these agreements work? Are you agreeing to these agreements? These are the ones that you've been using for the last several months. So I want to keep them up for folks to have a chance to read them, or if you want to take a quick screenshot, you can do that. But I don't want to move the slide until you're ready. So I'll wait another 5 seconds or so if you need to take a quick screenshot. All right, so then here is the important question. Do you agree to those? And you'll remember that team agreements are not meant to be locked in stone. They are meant to be an evolving document that over time you come back and say, does this still represent who we are? They're designed to not only help you be more efficient, but they're designed to help with some of the challenges that all of you mentioned when I did my interviews with you around how are we communicating together? How do we resolve conflict? Your team agreements become that roadmap to help you get there. All right, we've got 10 folks so far. Let's keep it open for maybe another 15 seconds and let's see where we get to. All right, so it looks like these are your new agreements. And I'm not surprised because you've been using them for a few months when we've been together. Now the work for you is to move them out of this context and into when you're meeting and working together. Tom, any thoughts from your team about where those team agreements will live? Will those also have a home on the website, or do those live in agenda packets? Do you have a thought about that?
My first thought is I think we can include them in the agenda packets. It can be a standing item right after the agenda. It can be in every agenda packet is my initial thought, but happy for input and whatever works best for folks.
Excellent. Thank you. I think the agenda works well, Tom, based on other groups that I've worked with. That way they're there, they're front of mind, and it allows the group something they can refer back to if they start to feel stuck. Any thoughts about that, about Tom's suggestion? All right, excellent. So now we've got the agreements. Let's move into strategies. You may remember that you have seen 6 different strategies that were suggested. And Tom has mentioned that he's willing. I'm so grateful for you, Tom, just to do a really high-level overview. Folks have already seen these, but let's just reorient ourselves to what these are. And then we're going to dive deeper specifically into strategy number 2 next. So Tom, any high level that you'd like to offer here?
Yeah, so these I think really came out of the mission discussion as we were talking about our mission, trying to identify the different things that the RHC did, but trying to keep that mission statement fairly concise and straightforward and not able to fit everything into it. But there were some important things that we wanted to capture. So really, these strategies are an attempt to capture those things that aren't kind of appropriate for the mission statement, but were still important to capture. And so just talking through them at a high level, the first one really focused on funding, which I think we all agree is a core function of the RHC, is setting those funding recommendations. The second one, I know Amy said we want to talk a little bit more. I think that's kind of perhaps one of the stickier ones around in sharing or informing policies, programs, and processes. We've also talked about raising awareness with the public. We've got a regional housing newsletter now, so doing more outreach and education with the public. Advocacy, we were just talking about our legislative priorities, so I think that falls under some of the advocacy work that the RHC does. And then really just serving as that forum. It's a place for jurisdictions to come together and work collaboratively and share information. And then the sixth one really kind of builds on that, or specifically around kind of plans and initiatives that are going on in our region. So really an effort to kind of put a little bit more meat on the bone around kind of the mission statement and build that out a little bit more through these strategies.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Before we move on and dive more into strategy number 2, are there any questions about what these strategies mean or any conversation that you want to have? Okay, let's dive then specifically into this second one. And Tom mentioned that this one is around policies. A few governance things to consider is that your tech team develops a work plan each year. And so let's start by, I want to make sure, Tom, did I miss a slide in here? This doesn't look like, is this connected to strategy 2?
Not directly, no, I mean, kind of broadly, but.
Yes, let's see. I think I lost a slide. I will, what just happened here? Let's see. Oh, here we go. This is the one, right? Yes. About the recommendations to jurisdictions.
Yeah, I think that's
yes. Okay, great. Somehow I got my slides got mixed up. So when RHC completes a task and they've made a recommendation, which is your process, it makes a recommendation to jurisdictions. The question then becomes, what is the process? How do jurisdictions consider those? What does that actually look like? And I'm curious, Tom or other staff, is there any other context you could add around this question? I think it's pretty straightforward, but you may have a little nuance that might be helpful.
Yeah, I guess I would kind of going back to 2 a little bit, because I think the questions kind of are related, but is, you know, at the retreat in May, we really talked a lot about, you know, had a lot of discussion around the term policy and whether that was appropriate or not. And we talked about policy light. And so in this really tried to identify that this is when a jurisdiction has expressed a desire for the RHC to work on something that is kind of policy or program related. And so how does the RHC, how do jurisdictions kind of interact with the RHC? Does that happen as part of the work plan development? Does that happen kind of in other ways? So if the RHC is going to tackle topics that touch on policy, and I think everyone agreed that the RHC is not a policy making body, we don't set policy, but in terms of recommending or exploring, considering options, you know, what is the relationship between councils, the commissioners, and the RHC, and what is the order of how that communication goes back and forth, so that the RHC isn't getting ahead, too far ahead of the jurisdictions, and but is being responsive to jurisdictions.
Thank you, Tom. And I wonder if we could just quickly go through these jurisdictions and ask for feedback. So who would like to start? Yes, Robert, please. We're eager to hear.
Yeah, let's break the ice. Let's do it. You know, I thought about this for a little bit, and I wonder if, let's see, I wonder if a formal process or form could be created around this. In Olympia, when we do policy work to the full council, and independently as council members, we have a referral form that we fill out. And I would almost recommend creating some sort of basic 1-page or 2-page form that could be the basis for policy recommendations. That form could also could be the form for placing it on the agenda. I'm just thinking of something like that so that there's a more of a formal documentation process for making recommendations, right? Clearly it has to go back to each jurisdiction, but I think having some sort of solidified process could help.
Thank you. Others, what would you add to what we just heard from Robert? Hi, Carolyn.
Hi, Robert, I appreciate your thinking on that. I'm also thinking of the makeup of our council and anticipating that there might be a little pushback on having to fill out a form to get the RHC to work on something. You know, a lot of our work doesn't, you know, it flows, like I'm the city representative from Lacey, so I get feedback from our council, but a lot of the work of the housing council flows directly to the county more so than back out to the jurisdictions. So I'd like to have us look at that dynamic and model and see what our other members have to say about that. But I do like your thinking about wanting to have a container there and a process for which things do get considered.
Thank you, Carolyn. Other thoughts or ideas?
I'd just like to ask for an example. What would be an example of a task that we would do that would get recommended to a jurisdiction, or, you know, I can't envision how this happens, or what. If someone asked me to say, well, what would something like this be? I wouldn't be able to answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Joan. And my guess is if you have that question, others might too. Tom, can you think of a good example from the staff side?
Yeah, I guess I'll think of maybe 2 examples. One is, was it a year ago or so? The RHC had a presentation, Lisa Sparkman did a presentation on mold and moisture in housing and looking at property maintenance codes and whether there was an ability to enhance or strengthen property maintenance codes around mold and moisture issues. And so in taking that back to some of the jurisdictions, there was a little bit of like, hey, wait a second, what's the RHC doing? It felt like the RHC was perhaps a little in front of the jurisdictions, and the jurisdiction like, we don't have the time to work on this. This isn't part of our work plan. You know, where is this coming from? And so there was some, I would say, I don't know, miscommunication between the RHC talking about mold and moisture codes and then kind of what jurisdictions were expecting or not being ready for that and not kind of anticipating that. And so it kind of didn't go anywhere. And so I think that was one example. I think we've also had conversations where after the grants pass Supreme Court decision, hey, should there be discussions at the Regional Housing Council around how jurisdictions handle closure of encampments? And is that something that the RHC should make recommendations to jurisdictions about? If so, how would that happen? So I think those are 2 examples of topics that, one, the RHC took some action and it didn't kind of really go anywhere because the jurisdictions weren't ready for it or weren't expecting it. And another where there was some conversation about whether the RHC should tackle that, but we didn't know how to do it because there was no real mechanism for figuring out how to have that conversation and what to go back to the jurisdictions with.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
I see your hand, Robert. I just want to confirm with Joan first. Joan, did those examples resonate?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, excuse me, talking about those things at council in Tumwater. I do.
Okay.
I I guess I'm just a little confused by why this is such I'm just going to use the term, a big deal. I mean, if a city has a work plan and something that the RHC recommends, like the things that Tom was talking about, I would think that it would be a positive thing then to create the conversation or whatever in a jurisdiction. Both of the examples that he gave, we had conversation around that in Tumwater.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was because, RHC brought it up or it's in our work plan. I don't know the answer to that, but.
Yeah, thank you, Joan. Let's hear from Robert and Brad, and let's see if that. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Were you saying something else?
No, I was just saying, I don't know. It sounds to me like maybe we're trying to get a little formal about this. And I think it's kind of up to representatives here. If we bring up something and talk about it and it's that important, I'd certainly go back and ask for a slot to talk about it.
Okay, thank you.
So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Joan. Let's hear from Robert and then Brad.
Brad, if you want to go first, I don't know if you're responding to that.
Yeah, no, I think just as a quick clarification, I think the example that Tom provided and the answer that Councilmember Kathy provided is probably a good illustration of how the current process works. And I think the issue wasn't necessarily that we didn't, as Tumwater, consider the recommendation. We just didn't necessarily support the recommendation. And maybe that's the next part of the discussion about, it's one thing to say, here's something that's coming from the REC that we should consider. And we obviously, through the electeds coming back to the council and so forth and presenting this, have the opportunity to do that. But then what happens if a particular jurisdiction decides it goes a different direction or something of that nature?
Yeah, thank you, Brad. And I think we'll get there on the next slide too. So thank you for that. Robert, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, it almost, another thing that comes to mind about the structure is when we do our climate work, I always compare these two, Regional Housing Council and the climate mitigation, because they have they're structured differently and they have similar issues. And so, for the climate, we have a plan, right? We have actionable policies and a plan to get to the goals. And I wonder if such a drafting of a structured plan of policy objectives approved by the different jurisdictions is something that could help create more of a structure to getting to the goals. Moving towards the policy side of this rather than just the funding side of it, right? And the response side, but more towards the action and proactive side of governance. I'm wondering if there's a appetite for that. That takes a little bit of time, obviously, to do, not for tonight, but I just think it's something I always think about, like an action plan, some sort of end goal, measurable place to go.
Thank you, Robert. And I think this next part may get us there. And if I had done the slides in order, it would have made more sense. So my apologies. I think when we had it, the slides looked right. So I have no idea what happened, but this is where we were supposed to start. Tom, does this look more right to you? Yeah, okay. So this is where we wanted to begin, because this, and Robert, I think this is where you were headed. So this is the offshoot of strategy 2 that Tom talked to us about. And when you look at that broader strategy, some of the governance questions that fall underneath it that may be worth conversation are up here on the slide. And some of them are in line with what Robert was saying. Brad, I think some of these also line up with what you were saying. And you as a group get to decide, is this worth talking about? Is this worth you having the conversation? So the first one is, what is that process? Robert, you had mentioned that Olympia does a form. Carolyn, you said, well, yeah, but some folks might not really like that idea. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on number 1. What is the necessary process in order to get work started, in order for the RHC to take on something? Yeah, Brad, hi.
Okay, just very quickly, I think every jurisdiction here has prepared a housing element that has implementation actions that are driven in large part by state requirements. that if you probably compare them across the board, they're very similar. There are opportunities identified definitely in our plan that call for regional cooperation. And I think as part of the discussion at the tech team, really the tech team should be looking at those opportunities that each of their plans has to work together and to develop what needs to be done through those plans. So we're not necessarily, we don't need to build a separate plan like the climate action plan has. We have our own individual housing action plans and housing elements. We just use what we have right now and build from that.
Thank you, Brad. Tom, can I ask for your thoughts on that? Ideas, or what's your reaction?
Yeah, and I think we did that a couple of years ago and did a cross comparison between the housing action plans. I think that's part of it. I think those don't really get into the homeless services realm as much. So I think now we have a 5-year plan, so we can look at kind of maybe the housing action plans and the 5-year plan as a basis for that. And I think there's also some timely issues that come up kind of outside of those that we may need to address. But I think that's certainly kind of one avenue for addressing those. Yeah, I'd agree.
Thank you. Susan, hi.
Hi there, Susan McLaughlin, Community Planning Economic Development Director for the City of Olympia. I would agree with Tom, and I want to just, I'm fairly new to this group and I'm still learning, but what I can tell you is that homeless services and the nature of this work is that it's really important to be granular, and we got to be in the weeds, and we have to be really nimble. There's urgent issues that arise. There's issues that are highly political and publicized. There and issues of sensitive nature. And so I think, given the composition of this group, I think it's really important that we enable a forum that's a little bit more organic and affords the ability to be nimble as a regional organization.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, Leonard.
Hey, I think to what Susan said, I think she highlighted several really good points. That the work is super important, but the work is also political. And in order for staff to have the clarity, they have to go back to their governing bodies and work that through, because this group will put, and I'm going to speak in kind of defense of my staff who have the role of also facilitating this. If there's something that this group decides, but that the county commissioners or council members are not aware of, that would become very problematic. And so while this group comes together with a very important and helpful lens, it does not negate or replace the lens that each political body has to look through and ultimately come to a consensus or a majority agreement about decisions that they're going to make. Those decisions then can come to this group and we can determine how we're going to cooperate and work together. But those decisions, I don't believe, because the councils are represented by the people to serve their purposes, it can't supersede that governing body's ability to address situations, and sometimes a very rapid way based on growing conditions or changing dynamics. Let's use, for example, the situation with the funding changes at the state. That affects every jurisdiction very differently. And so in order not to put staff in a no-win, in a lose-lose situation, a non-winnable scenario, I think this group has to realize that the work that we do is very, it has to be very responsive. And I think one of the strengths of this group is the ability to come together and to coordinate and to highlight where things are headed. But I don't know, based on how impactful these decisions will be to the governing bodies, that they could take the place of those governing bodies' decisions.
Thank you, Leonard. I saw a lot of nods as Leonard was talking. Is there any reaction or anything else? Yeah. Hi, Joan.
I'm sorry. I totally agree with what Leonard just said. And in a way, I was kind of trying to say that, you know, each jurisdiction has to do what they do. And we're at times very different. I mean, you know, what our work plan is and what we feel we need to focus on. So I think we need to keep in mind what he just laid out and think about, maybe we need to think about ourselves a little differently. What, you know,
Great.
anyway, I wanted to thank him for that because I think it was clear, and I think it hits a point we need to take. So just thanks, Leonard.
Thank you, Joan. Tom, from a staff perspective, the conversation that we just heard, is that helpful with number one? Is there more that you and your team might need regarding this first question? I want to make sure that you're leaving with what you need, Tom.
Yeah, and I really, thank you, Leonard, for that. I think that's really helpful. I think, I guess just from a kind of putting that kind of maybe into steps, thinking through like, what does that mean? What does that look like to go to councils and the commissioners and get that input and then bring that back to their HC? I think just the mechanisms in place to do that, I might have some questions about, but I think kind of philosophically that makes sense.
Great, thank you. Would it be helpful, Tom, if we also went through 2, 3, and 4?
Sure.
Okay, it seemed to me that alone didn't answer these 3, but I wanted to make sure that I was checking my assumption. So the second thing to consider is, can the RHC elected member, can they speak for their jurisdiction? Can they speak on behalf of that? Robert, what's your thought about this one?
I think this is a philosophical difference between cities and the county, because I believe, and so I can't speak for Danny entirely, but we both seem to believe that we do speak for our jurisdiction when we're selected these positions. We don't always agree as a council, but that is why we every few years select our positions. We as a council vote and select and retreat who is in what position and who is the alternative. And I guess I'll just go down the list if that's okay with you. 3, no, I don't think it needs to come back to our council unless it's something that is requiring a large change, because we as a our staff inform us, and it's kind of a two-way street, and we're aware of what's coming up. Jay's usually at these. I know Susan is at this. So for 4, I think they do provide guidance on these things. And like I said, I meet with staff always the week before, the week before that on these. So I think that your answer is going to be different depending on the shape of the council or the governing body. But for us, I think that we can.
Thank you. Really helpful. Carolyn, what's your perspective?
Well, I think it's been the practice of the leads representing the jurisdictions to speak for the jurisdiction.
Yeah.
I can tell you there's been a little rumbling in Lacey, however. I think there are some who feel like I may be a little left of where some of the council is and not, so there's a move afoot to try to force the elected lead delegate to clear things through the council before they can vote on something. I don't know whether that's going to come to pass or not, but I think it would not be very time efficient if we had to go through that, but we'll see.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah, it just, I think there's some sensitivity in Lacey that some of the jurisdictions have a little bit more resource and they're kind of a little out in front, and we're being expected to try to stay even without the same kind of resources. And I think there's some differences of opinion about what, what the best practices should be for addressing homelessness and affordable housing. And it's such a contentious issue all over the place anyway. And we have some rather strong points of view on our council.
Thank you. When we look at number 2, can the RHC elected member speak? Oh, I'm sorry, Vanessa, hi. I want to make sure we're hearing you. Hi there.
So not being an elected on the board, the one thing I'll add is that I think this question matters back to the context that Leonard brought up, which is the recommendation or the item that's being voted on going to have direct impact back to the jurisdiction? Is it something that would change local policy without the involvement of the full council, or is it a different level of decision making? And I think that matters in the context of 2 in terms of how that is answered. And so I just wanted to just bring that back up to the top of this discussion, because I think that those are 2 totally different answers depending on what the item is that you're talking about.
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. It's a great point, because what you're saying might also impact numbers 3 and 4, because based on that, well, maybe I do want to vote or maybe I don't. Yeah, really great. Thank you for that. Leonard, hi.
Yeah, thanks. And what I'll add to Vanessa, I thought she made some great points, is also what's the level of staff engagement or work that will be created? Because that is something that then me as the county manager and other city managers, but ultimately I have to take that back and balance that with our board and all the other things that are competing for priorities, etc. So, I think there's a way to make all that work. And I don't think, and I agree with Vanessa, it's not a mutually exclusive kind of conversation, but there are nuances there that I want to make sure we don't put staff in an awkward situation to where then they would be having to come back to leadership, because I don't always attend these meetings, and so, like, what does that look like when they come back? And then we have to walk that through, and then I have to walk that through with the rest of the board members, which I don't think is different in how cities work per se, but I do think that maybe the awareness and how things are presented. So to Councilmember Vanderpool's point about like a plan, that sounded like very interesting, because then there's broader awareness as to what direction is being set.
Thank you. Emily, hi.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the conversation, and I kind of also am leaning towards maybe like I don't know, talking through or thinking through what Robert's suggestion was about the form, because like a form could be anything. Just saying we're going to do a form doesn't necessarily mean. I did hear Carolyn's like kind of initial thought about that, which was, well, I don't know that Lacey would necessarily want to fill out a form just to communicate with the RHC. And I hear that too, and that makes sense. But I think if we're looking at like a form to streamline efficiency up front versus RHC having a conversation and then all of us going back to our jurisdictions and having that conversation, then management has to field that and run it through staff and align it with priorities of each jurisdiction. All of that work is a lot harder than doing a form up front that can kind of highlight something for staff in each jurisdiction that says, hey, this is what the RHC is thinking, or have it be like a two-way communication thing where jurisdictions can do the same thing if they want. They can send their representative to the RHC with something that kind of outlines their position, which would also allow for elected officials who are appointed to the RHC to be able to differentiate like, hey, here is the board's position, but me speaking as an individual, this is how I feel, because we should be free to say how we feel in this meeting, but we also shouldn't undermine, we're not here to undermine what our jurisdictions are saying. So, and I struggle with that too sometimes when I'm the minority vote somewhere, but then I have to go talk about it on an external committee and I'm like, I need to say this is coming from the board and this is coming from me. So having something that really clarifies that, I think would be helpful. And if it's a form, then that would be fine. But if there are other suggestions about how to accomplish that, I'm of course open to hearing those too.
Thank you. What you were just sharing, I remember hearing that when we first came together at the fairgrounds, that folks were having this dual role and how that creates a conflict. And thank you. Let's hear from Jacinda and then Robert.
Hi, y'all. I'm going to try to be quick, and I apologize for the background noise. But wanted to just speak a little bit about the quotations that are around express their desire, because I think that's different than the RHC deciding that something is going to be something that the RHC works on. So I think it would be helpful as a member, speaking as a member of the technical team, to have some sort of consistent process in which the tech team itself knows at what point does something be could something be elevated out of tech team to the full RHC to have these conversations about like what kind of resources might be needed and what are different jurisdictions thinking before then deciding if it is something that the RHC takes on as a project or a workload. So yeah, just kind of calling the attention again to that express their desire, not necessarily meaning that something that is expressed as a desire by one jurisdiction doesn't mean that the expectation is that it will be an RHC. The RHC will take that work on.
Yeah, thank you. And that came up a lot in the interviews just at the very beginning around some folks, is this real? Is it happening? Is it not? When does it go? So yes. And it seems like a small issue, but I don't think it is. I think what you just mentioned actually creates a whole ripple effect depending on how that goes. Robert, what's on your mind?
I like a lot of what I'm hearing here. I will say that just to clarify about a form or a document, right? I would I don't want it to be arduous. I don't want it to be an extremely long thing, and I don't want us to throw work at staff in the middle of them working on other things. Clearly, but I just gonna give an example of something. Last year when we worked on tenant protections, we had done that policy, and then we had brought it back to this body, and it didn't really go anywhere because it's more like, hey, we did this. Would you be interested in doing this at your jurisdiction? And I if there was more of a formal process of saying, hey, this is the policy that we're doing in our city, our jurisdiction. You don't have to pass it yourselves, but it is attached to this document. If you would be interested in pursuing this, because I sometimes think that there's always an opportunity where even we all have. I mean, we're looking at. It was brought up about how we all have very similar goals because of state law alignment, right? Comprehensively. And I always wonder about the power of having one jurisdiction work on one policy and another jurisdiction work on another policy. And then you just go into control find and you change the names because we both function in Washington state law, uh, and use our resources to appropriately achieve things. And so that's something that I think about quite a bit about using what we do in each jurisdiction to we don't have to agree on everything and pass everything. Clearly, we have that ability to separate ourselves as unique cities and as a unique county. But I think that there's always an opportunity to share in policy working, and we do that to a certain degree. But I'm one. That's the thing I brought up the forum was the idea of both presenting and saying, hey, we did this. We should be a resource to each other in that way.
Thank you. And I've heard that from particularly the smaller jurisdictions too, that it really is welcomed oftentimes to have some of those resources and those templates. I want to be mindful of time because there were a few other important questions that have been raised that I want to get through, but I want to make sure that you've had an opportunity to have the conversation that you want around this subsection of strategy 2. And Tom, I always put you on the spot, but I think you really are the where do things go when we all leave this meeting. So does this help with the direction for your team? Are there other places, Tom, where we need to actually dive a little bit deeper? What does your team need moving forward?
No, this is very helpful conversation. Really
Okay.
appreciate everyone's input. There's certainly some subtlety to these. You're right. It's not a one size fits all. And so I think there's some work to kind of flesh some of this out, but I think this has been a helpful conversation, and I think we have what we need to continue moving forward.
Okay, excellent. Is there anything else you want, Tom, regarding a potential form? Does staff want to think about it? Is that something that deserves a little more time to consider? That felt like an important topic that everyone mentioned.
Yeah, I think it's something tech team can kind of noodle on and think
Okay.
about and maybe come back with a proposed process or recommendation. So.
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciated hearing from members about the intent is to not create more work for staff. That was one of the biggest concerns when I first met all of you, was that staff were feeling the brunt of extra work and then not wanting, for the rest of you, not wanting to add to that. So thank you for reiterating that again today. Speaking of the tech team, so let's talk briefly, if we can, about their work plan. So as all of you know, each year the tech team puts together a work plan that RHC approves. There are 3 questions that we would like your input on, 3 questions where we would like to hear your thoughts. The first one is, who has to approve that work plan and at what point in the process? Secondly, do councils need to approve it? And then third, if that work plan requires staff resources from individual jurisdictions, how are they going to allocate hours and staff? How is this going to be equitable? How is that going to work? So I'd love to hear, I know this is a lot thrown at you at one time, but I'm really curious about your thoughts on this area of the work plan. And maybe we start with that. Oh, yes. Hi, Carolyn. I was going to say, maybe we even start with that first one, but Carolyn, don't feel obligated to start with question 1. I would just love to hear what you're thinking.
All right. Well, I can do a quick answer to one. I think the council itself has to approve the work plan, and I think it comes to us as a draft. We consider it, they come back, and we adopt it.
Okay.
And I think we should have the authority to do that. I'm not sure that our jurisdictions need to approve that work plan. And for the third one, I'd really like to call on tech team members to share insights there in terms of especially allocating hours and staff time and that sort of thing. So I don't know if I can call on Team Lacey here, Vanessa and Ryan, to talk about it, or if maybe Brad wants to weigh in, or others.
Thank you, Carolyn. I see Ryan's hand. Hi, Ryan.
Howdy. Yeah, for question number 3, thanks, Carolyn, for bringing that up. Just as a reminder, the interlocal agreement says that we are each to assign a quarter, I think it is, of an FTE towards RHC activities, which includes meetings and the tech team meetings and those kinds of things. And so, I think at least speaking for Lacey, we're committed to providing that quarter FTE that's usually divided up in multiple employees for their time. But if it goes beyond that, then I think we would need to go back and amend the interlocal agreement to recognize that more staff time would need to be put towards specific tasks. So, I would, as far as being equitable, I think we've done a good job of making everybody essentially equal partners in terms of the amount of staff that's been dedicated towards RHC activities. If there's any additional, in my opinion, above that quarter FTE, then that needs to be decisions probably made by individual councils through amendment of the interlocal agreement at that point, because that then affects staff resources, which affects budgets and all those kinds of things. And so, hopefully that helps at least provide some perspective from Lacey on number 3 as far as what we would need to do if we're going to move beyond what's currently allocated for employees staffing RHC stuff.
Thank you, Ryan. Brad.
No, I agree with Ryan's opinion. So for our case, we have the quarter FTE, which is 520 hours that we allocate every year for this. I think the issue is when we originally drafted the RHC ILA, we had an expectation that there would be an RHC budget. And as part of that budgeting process, that was an opportunity for the, that would go back to the governing body of each jurisdiction to approve. What we didn't think about was if we, in the case of a work program, which Carolyn is correct, the ILA says it's really the responsibility of the REC elected members to approve that. What happens if we have particular things that exceed that hourly amount? And so maybe that, as following Ryan's suggestion, that is something we should be considering as part of an amendment to the ILA to address that kind of thing. And that at point, give the elected bodies of each jurisdiction the ability to say, yes, we're willing to commit additional resources beyond what we've already allocated, or say no, and we don't want to do that.
Thank you, Brad. Other thoughts about that? Is there anyone else here from the tech team who would like to weigh in? Anyone else with an insight around that? So with this conversation then around the work plan, Tom, the question comes back to you, as always, all roads lead to Tom. With what you've just heard around the staffing levels, around how folks are doing it a little bit differently, what else does your team need, Tom, in order to move forward with this topic?
Not sure. Need to maybe think about it a little bit, but I think, having this conversation is helpful. So when we're developing the work plan, we can do that, being mindful. And I think it will be important as we're developing that work plan for kind of tech team members and jurisdictions to weigh in and say, hey, here are 2 or 3 things that'd be really nice to add to the work plan. We're not going to have the capacity. That's going to exceed our quarter FTE. And so having those conversations as we're developing the work plan and being mindful of that, because I think that will really kind of inform what can kind of go into an RAC work plan.
Okay. Did you get enough clarity on the first one of who has to approve it and when?
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think I've heard, it's the RAC, and that's the way the process has been. And so I think it's helpful. And I think kind of both Ryan and Brad make sense, their points in terms of, hey, if we're exceeding what's in the ILA, then we either need to amend the ILA or have a process where jurisdictions can consciously approve resources beyond that. And those types of things probably need to go back to councils or jurisdictions for approval. But as long as we're within the kind of framework of the existing ILA, then it shouldn't need to go back to councils.
Excellent, thank you. And I saw the chair nodding. I just make sure, Emily, is there anything you want to add about this direction or what you've heard this evening?
Yeah, you see me nodding a lot because I really appreciate all the input, and I'm trying to make sure I get it all down in my notes too. But I think, I don't want to add too much because there's not a whole lot I want to add and we don't have a ton of time, but I just want to say I agree with having that threshold of when, which we already do, it's already in the ILA, but having that threshold of whether if something is going to impact the ILA, of course it needs to be brought to the council's attention. So yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to add to the discussion, but I appreciate everyone's input.
Thank you. Carolyn, you get the last word on this one.
Well, I'm afraid it's not the last word on that. But,
okay.
I'm getting summoned that they need me to get a quorum with the Lot Clean Water Alliance board meeting. So I didn't want to just leave without saying sorry, but I gotta go. So thank you all for the discussion, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thanks. Bye.
There is one last slide on a governance topic, and it is around voting versus non-voting. I don't think you'll have an answer this evening. I wouldn't expect you to have an answer this evening, but what I wanted to do was to start to tee up the conversation that may continue to take place in your other time together. One of the questions that came up in the interviews, we saw it again when we were together at the fairgrounds, is the role of the advisory committees and how some expected that the advisory committees were operating as the word sounds, that they would advise all of you. Others said, well, if they've got lived experience, shouldn't they be voting? So this last issue around governance isn't just around voting or non-voting. It really is any other thoughts or ideas around those advisory committees. So I'd like to just leave that broad and hear your initial thoughts, ideas about that. let's try it this way. So let's talk about what is the current state. So the current state is they are, Robert, you're laughing. Are you feeling bad for me as your facilitator? Because it's all silence. I'm not sure what your laughter
I'm
means.
laughing because I feel like I'm always the first one to talk, and I'm just waiting for someone else to do it.
No, take it away. Save me from the awkward silence. What's your thought?
Could you
Do it.
restate the question for a second? Just a second.
Yes, absolutely. So the question is, you have advisory committees, and part of the governance is around, well, what is the role of those advisory committees? Should they be voting members? Should they be non-voting members? Does the role change? Is the role working as it is?
I would ask, do we have any advisory members still in the meeting right now? To ask them how they feel about it. If we have any more
Yes,
in here.
I'm still here.
Hi.
I'm
Do you feel-
thinking, and I have a barking dog right here, but I feel like I think that fundamental question for the board of like, is it just recommendations or is it advisory? Like, how participatory can we really be is an important thing to clarify. I feel like having a voting spot would make it more like have the advisory committees have more teeth. And I think that I'm also kind of channeling Candace here a little bit and what I've heard from the feeling of other advisory boards, not to speak on their behalf by any means, but I do think that it would need to be like really kind of clarified as to what that looks like and when that happens, and is it every vote or is it just certain votes or what that would be. But I would be in favor of that because I think it would give just more of a seat at the table for the advisory committees, which I do believe was kind of the intention initially. But I do understand that there's maybe other perspectives on that.
Thank you for sharing that. Leonard.
Thanks. My perspective would be to really appreciate advisory committees and the role that they play, but to keep the voting members, those that are appointed by the jurisdictions through that process. And I don't have, nor have I reviewed the ILA recently, but I believe that that's part of the structure of the ILA, but I could be wrong. So I think there's a lot to be said about that focus and the approach that advisory groups provide their advisement and recommendations, and the group gets talked through that. It changes it from an advisory group if there are voting members, and that structure would have to be relooked at.
Thank you. Brad.
I think one of the issues that I think, and what I've been hearing, obviously, when we listen to any discussions involving the various advisory boards, is there seems to be sort of a lack of work or communication between, say, the tech team members and the advisory board members and all of that. And the reason I bring that up is in a lot of jurisdictions like ours, for example, we use our planning commission as an advisory board, but there's heavy staff involvement. So in terms of being able to understand the concerns and be able to make all the connections and all that kind of stuff sort of before it reaches the council, there's a greater feeling that there's a connection between the commission and what's going on and all that kind of stuff. So I'm wondering, as part of the way of trying to address some of the concerns with the advisory board sort of being by themselves, is there a way to look at the structure of the technical teams that others support? Because I know we do have a technical team support person, but there's also a kind of a disconnect between a jurisdiction who has a lose the one person who's representing the tech team and then everybody else on the tech team. So I'm just wondering if we could look at other options for that.
I see your hand, Jacinda. I'd love to hear thoughts about about Brad's question. Is anyone aware of that or other options that might be there?
Yeah, I guess
Yeah, thanks.
I don't know if I'm like completely following the comment. Alex at the county and I representing Olympia staff, the Portable Housing Advisory Board. And then Jackie, and I know Kevin was at some point and maybe still is involved with the Homeless Services Board. So there are active tech team members that are staffing those boards. And I also wanted to just, I guess, kind of add that on our board anyway, we have had members drop off with communication, like in that process of dropping off of the board, communicating that they thought that the board would be advising on more than funding recommendations. They thought that they would have more ability to contribute their expertise, contribute their personal experiences or lived experiences, be able to really have more say in the work plan or at least like contribute more. And I think, obviously I'm not a voting member and I'm just part of the tech team. But these are people in our community that are, many of them providers on both boards. Many of them have lived experience. We've called on them to help us draft the Homeless Crisis Response Center or response plan, which we have said is our guiding, North Star. We just talked a few months ago and we continue to talk about how do we hear what the community, what providers are experiencing and making sure that we are on point. So to me personally, not like Olympia, but just me personally, I struggle with we are really relying on these folks so much in so many different ways, and can understand feeling like a voting member should be an elected member. And I also I feel like, I think we might have more participation or more robust participation if people felt like they did have, there was more that they could contribute or they felt like their opinion was really valued more.
Thank you, Jacinda.
I have a thought about this. I think based on what Jacinda just said, that there is a lot of expertise and lived experience and so forth on the boards. And maybe we have forgotten that in certain ways, and we put people in, this is what you're supposed to do if you're, on one of these teams. Maybe there should be a place each month in the agenda where, and especially if what we're talking about relates specifically to what, the group knows from lived experience or from research or whatever they do. Maybe we should incorporate it more into the discussion. Maybe we then, as electeds, could ask questions of those members on that issue, that they may know more about it than I do. I think that I personally think that it should stay that advisory are advisory and the elected members are the voting members. But I would really like to see more. I would like to hear more from the advisory groups. I'd like to hear them tell me things and I could ask them questions.
Got it. Thank you, Joan. And thank you for that third option too. It's really not just about voting or non-voting too. It's how do we really honor their participation? How do we learn? How do we, and really to get at some of what Jacinda was saying. And Jacinda, you didn't use the word disappointment, but that's almost what I was hearing, that folks, they think they're going to have an opportunity to do one thing and then it turns out being something else, which can almost feel disappointing, I would think, in some ways, based on that expectation. I'd love to hear from the chair and then Brad.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Yeah, so the word you just used, Amy, to kind of summarize Joan's thoughts was or not Joan, it was Jacinda who shared thoughts on advisory board members' feedback. And I think disappointed is maybe an understatement. I've heard comments from folks who are either current or past advisory board members who have felt like their experience is being exploited and then not used in an effective and meaningful way. And I wholeheartedly agree with that from those that I've heard that from. I think that that is the case, that unfortunately, and I don't think it's always intended, but unfortunately, that is the impact a lot of the time when government creates advisory groups, and it almost just feels like we check the box, we have your input, but then there's no meaningful implementation that incorporates the input. And that's something I would really like to lead the way on and make a huge, like, just kind of have a paradigm shift and really actually invite advisory board members to contribute in the ways that they feel are most meaningful. And we just heard from Meg, who is, as she stated, not speaking for everybody, but is kind of echoing some of the things that I've heard before. And from what I've heard, advisory board members share with me, they do want to vote. They do feel like that would help. They do feel like their voices would be more valuable if they were able to vote. Now, what we've talked through a little bit is, like, does that mean they vote on everything? Does that mean that there are specific things maybe pertaining to what that advisory board's purpose is that they can vote on? Those are some questions definitely worth exploring. Another thought that I had pop up was potentially maybe having, and this might be a terrible idea, so it's okay if that's the case, but I was thinking, like, what if an advisory board member or representative was present at the executive meetings when we're drafting the agenda so they could give their input on the agenda? Like I said, maybe that's a terrible idea. I don't want to step on the tech team's toes, but I'm just trying to think through, like, what are other options to allow for feedback to be more meaningful. But we really need to make sure that when we say meaningful, we're actually using the definition that the advisory board members would use themselves and not trying to, like, create meaningful opportunities that aren't coming from them. So what I've heard and what I support is allowing for advisory board members to vote on this council. Now, how we go about doing that, I think there are different avenues by which we could go about that, but I don't want to do another thing where we're like, oh, okay, we're hearing that, like, they want more input, so let's just give them a spot on the agenda and then they have more input. Because as the chair, like, I continuously try to call on advisory board members throughout the meetings to make sure they know that, like, I really want to hear from them. But, like, I'm not always going to be the chair, and I want to have something in place where advisory board members feel like their input is valued and it's formalized in that, like, they have a place regardless of who's leading the meetings. So I think that's really important.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's hear from Brad and then Robert. And just in terms of time, we've got about 5 minutes left in our meeting. Brad.
I'll keep it very short. The concern I have, and this is for coming from a smaller jurisdiction, is we're not necessarily hearing some of the conversations that, say, Olympia or King County are having. Thurston County. Sorry, Tom, that was horrible. With the advisory board, so we really feel out of the loop completely at times. And I also recognize that we've definitely heard from the advisory board members that they have very limited time themselves because of all their other commitments. So as much as we can to try to create a productive mechanism for all of us to hear and work together, that would be my preference.
Thank you. Thank you. Robert.
I was gonna make kind of a suggestion to what I was hearing from Emily, which was the maybe having an advisory board member that's selected from the other members for a 1-year term, and that person votes, right? I mean, that happens all the time. You'd have one person, right? One floating person, and that would just cycle through. You would just cycle through that person each time. But I think the other part of that is allowing not just creating culture of it, but codifying it where they can speak, because I'm on boards, and some of these boards, they'll have advisory members on them and they barely speak, or they just kind of show up and then they speak at the end for reports. And so like I think that we want to avoid in any way a situation where you have someone who's coming to speak from their experience and they're not, because they're not an elected official, or a staff member, that their opinion is kind of shortened to the end, right? I just want to specify that, because I've seen that, and I've seen a feeling of I guess disrespect, because that happens quite often.
Thank you, Robert. Emily.
Thank you. And I know we're coming close to time. I wanted to say, I really like what Robert just said, and I think that's a potential avenue or path forward. We do that on, like, we have the Board of Health where one jurisdiction has a representative and we rotate through the cities. So we have Lacey one year, and then Tumwater, and then Olympia. And maybe that's something we could do with the advisory boards, where we like rotate through, kind of like Robert suggested. And that person does get a vote. I think that could be a potential pathway.
Thank you. And Tom, I know the desire for this evening wasn't to come to a resolution. That was never the goal, to decide something very quickly, but it was to get the conversation started. In particular, because if this is a change that's made, it's going to require changes to that agreement, which takes some time. Is there anything, Tom, that you haven't heard that staff needs at this time regarding this last piece of governance?
No, I think I'm hearing some different opinions. So I think one of the things, perhaps the next step is for kind of tech team to come up with some options.
Okay.
In consultation maybe with the advisory boards, and kind of continue this discussion. It may, if there are going to be changes that would require a change to the interlocal agreement, which will have to go back to councils for votes. So that's a process that takes some time, and all the jurisdictions need to be on board. So I think, this is why we had this question, because we knew there were some different opinions and perspectives on this. So maybe we can, maybe with one of the items on our work plan for next year is to come up with some options for the RHC to explore kind of this question.
Great, thank you. And we are almost out of time, but that's okay, because we're at our last, I had other governance, but we've only got 1 minute. Anything else governance? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Leonard, you missed your chance. No, just kidding. If there are other governance, so I think Tom has always from the beginning been very clear about the ongoing conversation. So maybe this conversation tonight brought up other ideas or brought up other things you want to talk about. So make sure that you're continuing to do that. Yeah, Leonard, hi.
I have my 10-page memo.
Perfect. Great. Okay. So here's how I'd like to end our time. And then I'm going to ask Tom and Emily if they have any ideas on how or any thoughts on where we go from here. These are your values. These are the values that you've all agreed to. So I'd love for you to take just a moment and think about how you've shown up tonight. When you've shown up in this conversation, which of these values did you live into? And maybe you lived into all of them. So I'd invite you to take a moment and just see which of these values did you live into during our meeting. And this exercise that you're doing, I hope it's one that you'll do as you're working together, because the values aren't meant to just be on a piece of paper. They're really meant to be, how is it that you're going to work together? How are you going to collaborate together? How will you hold each other accountable? How are you going to ensure that there's equity? And when you think about the conversation that you've had over the last hour or hour and a half, I see all of these. I see all of these embedded in how you were talking about the work of the council and what you need to do. So just to ground us in what those are and how you're going to be moving forward. So I'd love to hear from Tom, and then let's close it out with the chair. Tom, anything you'd like this group to know? You've done a great job so far this evening of talking about where staff is going to do some follow-up work. Anything else you'd like the group to hear?
No, I think we have our work really for the RAC Tech team, working with advisory boards to craft the annual action or the work plan. And I think within that is some of the items that we started talking about, some of these governance items around voting, non-voting, the role of kind of the advisory boards, but also the processes around engaging with jurisdictions to flush out. So I think I see, kind of next several months of RHC work to take kind of the next steps on these and make them implementable.
Great, thank you. And Chair, any closing thoughts for our evening together?
Well, I know we're over time, so I won't share like all of them, but I do want to say I appreciate all of the work that we've done on this throughout the whole year. Everybody's participation has been incredibly meaningful and very, very valued. Just please know that even staff and, alternate representatives and definitely advisory board members, all of your input has been really valuable. And I think that the tech team has used a lot of it and shaped it into some form of a package that we can kind of go into next year with and all be on the same page as far as the RHC's purpose and mission. So I really appreciate all of that. And Amy, I appreciate all of your help with facilitating this complicated process. And the last thing I guess I'll say is I would encourage Regional Housing Council members to think through these conversations as we go into future meetings and future agendas, because you might think about like, oh, we're taking a vote here. Would this be something that's valuable for an advisory board member to vote on? Because we can maybe start kind of actively thinking about the decisions we're trying to make while we're taking actions to sort of conceptualize like what the impact might be if we made changes that we've discussed today and throughout the year. That's something that I would encourage folks to do just to maybe get some clarity, because we heard a couple people ask for examples throughout tonight's meeting and some really good examples were given. So I just, encourage people to kind of proactively think through and capture some of those examples ourselves as we move through different action steps in the future. But thank you so much for all of your input and all the hard work that's gone into this year. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to show up at all your meetings as public comment because I'm just going to miss you. So I'll see you soon.
Please do.
Okay.
Thanks, Amy.
Bye, everybody. Be well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, so with Amy's portion done, again, I just want to thank everybody, and that brings us to the end of our meeting, which is good of the order. And I know we're over time, so I respect if anyone has to hop off, but if anyone does have good of the order items, now is the time. All right, not seeing anything. Our next meeting is December 10th at 4 p.m. and I will see you all then. I hope you have a really great night. Thanks for your participation.